All right, welcome to a little video about that very interesting part of the pattern where we have finished the back triangle and it's time to begin our first wing. Now, there have been some questions, and I'm not surprised about them, particularly about the little extra stitch that you create when you start that first wing. So that's where we'll begin. First of all, orientation to my swatch. To make this easier to demonstrate, and I think clearer to all of you, rather than working on a full-size piece, instead I have worked just this little bit of gray garter stitch here, and that represents your entire back triangle, the thing that you have worked on until you get to the point where it's time to set up for the wings. And I have also done the first part of that setup, which is once I've done all the required knitting, the pattern will tell you that the next thing to do is slip some stitches off of the left end of the needle and onto some scrap yarn, and that's what I've done. Here on the blue yarn, I have the basis of a certain number of stitches that will become the foundation of the wing that will go in this direction. Here on the red scrap yarn, I have the number of stitches that will eventually become the basis of the back of the neck. And here, worked with the still in the working yarn that we already had attached to the work. I have the working yarn here, and these stitches are the basis of the first wing that we will work, which will go in this direction. Now, I have already done, at this point, with my working yarn, the first row of the charted pattern across to begin that new wing. And this is where questions are coming up, which is, at this point, once I have done the live stitches, I am to increase by 1, with an increase that goes by many different names depending on whose knitting book or knitting site you're consulting. Sometimes it's called the lifted increase. Whatever you call it, it works pretty much the same way. What you want to address yourself to is this running thread between the last live stitch on your needle and the first stitch that's in reserve on the scrap yarn for your neck back. In between those two, here I have this little running thread right at the top between those two stitches. And I need to, first of all, so here let's do what's called for. First of all, I need to use my needle to pick up like so. I'm sliding it in this way, left to right. Pick up that needle so that it becomes, in effect, a new stitch on the needle. Now we have that running yarn has become yarn over the top of the needle, which means that we can work it like a regular stitch. But we don't want to work it exactly like a regular stitch. We want to make one twisted stitch with it when we begin. And how do we do that? That means rather than knitting it the customary way, which is to go in through the front, this lifted running thread becomes a knit one back, or knit one through the back. So that's what we'll do. Rather than going through the front, we will instead go into the back and work that stitch. That gives us a twisted stitch, and a twisted stitch at this point is going to be a little tighter, a little snugger, and it will just give us a neater effect. Once we've done that, we have created that new selvage stitch that we need here. And we need that selvage stitch so that as we work this wing, we will have a nice, neat, presentable selvage at this end of the work. Otherwise, we would be working our pattern across, and when we got here, it would end with a sort of ugly abruptness, and we don't want that. Fine details make a pattern, so we need to have that stitch in there like that. So work across those live stitches, pick up that running thread, and then knit that running thread through the back to create one new twisted stitch. And then what you'll do with that selvage stitch as you continue that wing is that whenever you encounter it, you'll work it in whatever the fabric is for that particular stripe in your mosaic. If it's going to be part of a garter stripe, in your mosaic, then you're going to want to knit it on the right side and the wrong side. If, on the other hand, you're in a stockinette stripe in your pattern, then you're going to want to knit it on the right side and purl it on the wrong side. So I hope that's nice and clear. And next what I'll do is we'll move over to the foundation of the other wing, and I'll show you how that begins, because it's sort of the same thing, but of course we want it to go in the other direction and mirror the first wing. Now it's time to begin the left wing. So of course at this point we will have finished the right wing, and when we go to begin work on the left wing we should find those stitches, live stitches, waiting for us on a piece of scrap yarn. And the first thing that we need to do, well, there's no particular trick to this, but I thought why not include it in the video, is we want to take those live stitches and get them nicely, neatly, and securely back onto a needle after having stored them onto scrap yarn. This can be a bit fiddly, but for heaven's sake, take your time and do it in good light. And once you think you've got them all on, double check to make sure that you do. It never hurts to double check at moments like this in your knitting. I've got them all on there, and so now I will carefully pull out the blue scrap yarn, making sure not to also pull out the needle. You can imagine how many times I have done that. So try not to do that on camera in front of you all so that I look at least a little professional. And okay, there we are. So now I have left-hand needle with all the live stitches on it, and it's time to begin the first row of the left wing. The left wing also needs an extra selvage stitch, as did the right wing in the previous segment of this video, but we need to begin our first row with it rather than end our first row with it. So how do we do that? Well, there is absolutely no trick to this here. What we need to do is, no kidding, just make ourselves a slip knot and put that slip knot onto our right needle. It's good to make sure you have a decent tail for weaving in later when it's time to finish, but, well, we put on that slip knot, look, one new stitch. That is our first stitch of the left wing, is that selvage stitch. And then we simply begin working, of course, making sure to work with the working yarn and not with the tail. You'll notice that in this case, for this wing, the working yarn was not already attached to the work. I had to get it and reattach it. That's when I started that slip knot. That's when I reattached it to the work, and now that it is reattached, I can continue working in pattern as directed. And in this case, of course, we're making, sort of the mirror image of the first wing. So our added selvage is on the inside edge next to where the neck will be. And that first selvage stitch, well, you'll treat it the same way that you treat the extra selvage stitch in the other wing. Work it as garter stitch in garter stitch based stripes, and work it as stockinette in stockinette based stripes. That's it. This will be a nice neat selvage column for the inside of the wing, and of course you'll be increasing on the outside of that wing to make a nice matching, lovely, comfortable, pretty wing. So now we've begun our wings, and I will be back with more instructional videos as we move along. Thanks for being in the Temple of Flora Knit-Along. See you soon.